Today we are with Professor Stephen Voss at Boğaziçi University. Hi, Professor. First, I would like to thank you for joining us today.
It is a delight. Thank you.
And first of all, as a young philosophy student, I really wonder your perspective, which I'm some kind of familiar with from your lectures and our personal gatherings. But how is it like to spend this much of time in philosophy? To examine things which perhaps in daily life are not seem that complicated.
The thing is, in everyday life, things are complicated, and we just don't want to look at them. And what you find in little children shows something like this. I'll tell you one story from my own experience. I'm driving my 5-year-old daughter to school, and she turns to me and says, "Where did I come from?" And I thought it's a little early for her to be thinking about birds and bees and boys and girls. So I tried to think how I would say a few simple things to her, and I said, "I'm your father, and you know your mother." She said, "That's not my question. Where did all of us come from?" And she is starting to think philosophically, and it's part of everyday life. So there is a connection with ordinary life and philosophy. Philosophy often just asks one deeper question than you would normally ask about whatever you're talking about. Mother and father, 2 plus 2. I tell my daughter it's 4. And maybe she says, "Yeah, but what is 4? Are there numbers?" You see, just one more step. Yeah.
I also remember a story from your childhood. If I'm not remembering, it's Alex, your friend Alex, and you. Would you like to tell that story?
Yes, Alex was a little older than my daughter. He was about 8 or 9. I was about the same. And I played with him a lot. I want you to picture him. He had hair that did not lay down like that. And he was a little fat. His t-shirt didn't completely cover his stomach. You have a picture of Alexander, but we called him Alex. Well, one day I'm walking over, because he lived 4 or 5 houses away from me, walking over, and I see him 10, 15 meters away from me, and it comes into my head, I will never be able to know what Alex really is like. There will always be a gap between me and Alex. I think as I look back, I was starting to think philosophically, and in some way, this is what Descartes tells us too, isn't it? Someplace up here I've got a soul, here's a body, there's a body, and somewhere there's a soul, and our two souls are trying to communicate, and we never will directly be with each other. The closest person, my mother, my sweetheart, she's always going to be alien to me. It came to me when I was 8 years old.
How then your understanding of this phenomenon changed? Like from this day, let's say, what is your ideas about this has changed?
It's a good question. It really hasn't changed very much. But I'll tell you, about a month ago, a very good friend of mine, she used to teach at Boğaziçi. Now she teaches in Adana, but very good friend. She came to visit, and she told me, and it's nothing improper or anything, but she said, we are one with each other. We are such good friends. And I started to think it's possible to be one with another person. You know, she's married, she has children. It's not that sort of thing, but it's possible to be. In Turkish, we don't just say arkadaş, we say sometimes dost. And maybe it means a different metaphysical relationship with somebody. And maybe it is possible. Maybe Descartes got it wrong.
I also have a question about Descartes and his Cartesian understanding that you spent considerable amount of time studying. And also you are interested in Advaita Vedanta, Buddhism, and more mysticist thought. How would you compare these two sides of the spectrum about understanding the self and each other?
Well, good question. Because if you want to understand the self, the person, and you know, my daughter and Alex help me see this is not simple. And if you want to understand, you should be open to not just American philosophy, Turkish philosophy, British philosophy. You should be open to France and Germany and India and China and Africa and any philosophy that sheds some light on the question. Well, there's a Buddhist word, anatta, that means there isn't any self. Okay, I have to look. If I'm really serious, I can't just say that's not my department. I can't just say I'm an American philosopher. If I really want to understand it, I got to read that Buddhist stuff. And Advaita Vedanta, that's another Indian school, and they say there is only one self. We are all one, literally one. Okay, I've got to investigate their reasons. And in both cases, I also have to reflect on my own experience after I read their books. And we are getting, you can see, just within Buddhism and Vedanta, totally different stories and different from the usual European American stories. Yeah.
As a meta question, we already talked about this, but what do you think about the importance of thinking about self in an academic manner?
Well, I do think it's possible for philosophical, even academic philosophical thinking to help me live a good life. I do think that. And many philosophers in the past have said what's important isn't the logical analysis of what somebody says, it isn't evaluating good reasoning and bad reasoning, it isn't even getting a good theory. The important thing is applying what you've learned to your own life. And that was very clear in the writings of Stoic philosophers about 2,000 years ago. Don't just play word games. Don't just be clever. Use it to live a good life. So, and I think this is a real possibility. I see things in myself that are not really me. They are things that got put on me by terrible things that happened when I was a child, mistakes my mother and father made. And I find myself saying, I am angry, but it's not really me who is angry. It's a clone of my father who would have gotten angry in this situation. And I'd like to find out who I really am. This is something Nietzsche says. He says, you're project is be who you are. Sounds crazy, but if you ever saw the movie Matrix, I don't know who I am. Which pill have I really taken? You know, am I being myself or am I being what I have been programmed to be? Today it's a really big issue, isn't it? Who have you been programmed to be? Facebook wants me to be a certain way. Instagram, you know, they want me to be a certain way, so I will buy lots of stuff. You know, yeah, and I'd like to be who I really am, not who they want me to be.
I think it is also interesting that in a sense we are all like same, have mutual experiences in our lives, but also we have lots of differentiations from each other, and we are mostly unable to share most of the things that we have. Do you think can philosophy, as you know, not only about our lives, but would it can it change society and will make us able to, let's say, better share things that we have?
You're thinking of actual making social change, or you're thinking about personal interaction?
Both, actually.
Yeah. In other words, one of the interesting mistakes Descartes made, and he's so influential, not just in philosophy today, but in the way Western culture thinks. Well, he told me, I am an isolated individual. And that's absolutely wrong. And I think if we try and rescue our understanding of the self from that picture, that isolationist picture, I will see more about how you and I are related to each other. There's I mentioned we got to read other guys besides the Western guys, and I learned a concept that is a very big concept in Africa, and that is Ubuntu.
I remember that from our classes.
Well, Ubuntu focuses on this conception of a human being, that essentially I am part of a community. That is part of my very nature. Descartes says, maybe there aren't any other people, you know? You know who you are. Forget all those other guys. And Ubuntu really captures more about human nature. Aristotle had said a long time ago that a human being is first of all rational, but also first of all political, relational. We are and Ubuntu, we are in relation to one another. That's part of our nature. And this is the idea of Ubuntu. If I don't have any personal relationships, I'm not yet a person. Ubuntu says, I am because we are. It's our relationships with others that make us a real person. I'm starting to look at you in a different way. I'm starting to look at myself in a different way when I hear about Ubuntu. And I'd like to learn it not by reading an African book, but by meeting some Ubuntu people. I would like to become part of an Ubuntu community. And then I begin to understand. Because one thing I say myself, this is my opinion, you can learn philosophy in books, but it really has to be learned by your own experience, paying attention to your own experience. Yeah. So I'd like to go to Africa and become part of a community, and then I'll be able to do philosophy in a lot better way, won't I? Yeah.
What do you think about, let's say, our conditions today in Boğaziçi, as living through hard times, and we are perhaps going to the opposite side of Ubuntu, I am because we are, and lots of people are suffering from kind of mutual but also different in certain ways, but suffering from certain oppressions today in Boğaziçi. Do you think we can use these ideas to change our being together in Boğaziçi today?
Wow, that's a good question. What I'm experiencing is the kind of thing in America a black person experiences every day, that I'm being put down, that I'm not being taken seriously as a person. And that is a real educational experience, isn't it? To understand what it's like. All my life I've been an American, white, male, privileged person, male, you know, all that stuff. And now I gain a little understanding of what it's like to be oppressed, which I haven't had too much in my life. And of course, I have to reflect on my experience, and philosophy will help you do that. I see philosophy as not a bunch of books and theories. I see it really as an activity that you carry out, as we said, by going one step deeper into the questions normal people ask. So if you can get skillful at taking that extra step, you will see things that other people haven't been able to see. Yeah. And we need real understanding of the situation we're in, because we have hard decisions to make. Should I just fit into the dictator's community, or should I fit into my colleagues' community, or should I fit into my students' community? Who do I identify with to make me who I am? Which community do I fit into? And that's not only a question of who I am and who I'm related to, but it's an ethical question. It's a question about how to live.
So, kind of responsibility to have this possibility to ask and go a bit further than.
Yes, because then it's also going to change the way you live. A beautiful book we ran into was by an ancient, a student of ancient philosophy. It was called Philosophy as a Way of Life, because he saw ancient philosophy as only a part of a whole way of living. Plato, Aristotle, the Stoics, a lot of them had their own school, and that school wasn't just philosophy. You learned mathematics, and you learned dancing and music, how to make music. And philosophy was just a part of that, and it helped you live a good life. Well, I think they saw something that we seldom see. Philosophy isn't just an academic discipline in a university. It can be part of a good way of life. and it can guide you about how to live, which things are really worth caring about. So I think the Stoics got it right. It can really be part of life. I started to see that when I was talking to Alex and when I was listening to my daughter. Yeah, it can be part of your life. Yeah.
Also, I wonder your experience on Turkey today, and let's say your undergraduate years, being a student, going through hard times and living bad things, good things.
Well, yes, that's a good question, because I am lucky enough to have a lot of perspectives. I was an undergraduate mathematics and philosophy student a million years ago, and now I'm living in a totally different country. I'm a lot older, and so forth. So I'm looking at this world in so many different ways. America and Turkey are two different places for sure. For example, when I was at university as a student, there were great social problems that we had to deal with. The two problems that I knew about were racism in America against black people, and there was a war in Vietnam, and America was doing terrible things in that war. 2 million Vietnamese died. And it was a very simple situation. There are two bad things happening in this world. Let's fight against them. And we fought. Now, what does the world look like now? There are about 92 different social problems. There is sexism. There is prejudice against gay people. There is climate disaster. There is perhaps fascism in some countries, and so on. And moreover, our attitude now isn't we're going to change the world. It is we're afraid the world is going to change us. There is much more fear today in Turkey than I saw when I was a student in America. I saw us fighting against that fear in Gezi. We stood up for what we believed in. We wanted to change the political structure and our relationship to it. Well, we need that Gezi spirit. We need that old anti-Vietnam War spirit. That's what I believe. We need to stand up and fight for what's important to us. Maybe we learn to be afraid thanks to our ancestors in this country, because we had a kind of dictator in Osmanlı times. It wasn't a democracy 100, 200, 300 years ago. And maybe it's been built into our spirit genetically. Be afraid. Well, Nietzsche told us something worth remembering. There are two basic ways of living. One is based on fear, one is based on belief. You choose. And of course, Nietzsche is saying, come on, don't be afraid. Put your boat out into the ocean. Put the sail up. Don't be afraid. Live a real human life. Don't just say, I'm going to protect myself. That's a negative. It's a spirit that compresses you. And Nietzsche says, expand who you are. That's who you were meant to be. So I'm with him.
relation to that, again, question about philosophy. For Western thought, perhaps one of the most core concepts was reason, and studying of the reason and understanding the human understanding was some of the key projects. But also now, as you talked about Nietzsche, there is this side of philosophy that we are interested in sentiments. I mean, they are not both separate camps, they are always with each other. But what is precisely the importance of thinking about sentiments and not only about our understanding and reason?
You know, one thing to say is that reason comes in different packages. One is to be critical, to be logical, to say you have contradicted yourself, you're wrong. But another one is to create new ideas, to create new theories. So when we talk about reason, there's two kinds. In the dialogues of Plato, when he discusses reason, he wants us, first of all, to do that careful, logical examination of theories. So, what is a number? Remember that question we raised? 2 plus 2, what's that? What is a number? Okay, I've got different theories about that. I think hard, it's not this, it's not this. And then Plato says, at a certain point, a light goes on, and you start using a different part of your reason. And he even has a different Greek word for it. You see what number really is. And that other stuff, that careful, logical, left brain analysis that you were doing, just prepared you for this greater, expansive way of reason. But that's all reason. And your question was about its relation to sentiment, emotion. Well, I have to understand how emotion plays a role in my life. I have to understand that. I mean this. Emotion can dictate how I live, whether it's fear, whether it's sexual desire, whether it is blame and getting angry at people. I can be the victim of emotion. And a good project is to figure out how emotion can be my servant, not my master. And that takes a little theoretical, a little rational thinking. Descartes had written a book where he says, here is my project. It was simply for me to be in control of my emotions. For me to understand what things I can desire that have some chance of success, what things I should not desire. In other words, at that point, with the emotion desire, I get a clear understanding of what is a proper thing to desire and what isn't. That would be valuable. And so on, and so on. Do I spend my life blaming myself, blaming other people? Is that a good emotion to make me who I am? Maybe not. You see, and so on. I go back to Nietzsche's idea. If I have to choose emotion, among the emotions, the one to choose, it's not fear, it's not anger, it's love. And love makes me a totally different kind of being. I don't mean somebody loving me, that would be wonderful, but me being a loving person. Maybe that's who I am. Mr. Nietzsche, maybe you got it right. So it's thinking about the role of these emotions in our life, and then just being a good mechanic, saying, here's how this machine works, I got it, now I'm going to correct a few places where it needs repair, and you live a better kind of life. I agree with the Stoics. Living a good life is the point of philosophy.
About this topic, again coming back to Mr. Nietzsche and this idea of love as he puts it. I mean, we are talking about sentiments sometimes like we either control them or we ruin our lives. But in the context of love, and again, when we think about social beings, emotions are also like sometimes guiding us to do the right things, and sometimes they are irrational, and when we think about them we might say, oh, I will not do that, and actually this is not only a reasoning, but we are again going perhaps the side of fear. But through this two-sided relation, I think it might be valuable to think about them as also a way to reach something valuable, and not only something to control, and not only a servant of reason, but sometimes a balancing feature of our life.
Oh, that's interesting. So, in other words, maybe the master-servant relationship isn't the best way to think about me and my emotions.
Maybe.
Yeah, very nice. Yeah.
Because, for example, when we are talking about your young times and the things that United States were doing, the primary thing that make you act perhaps was not the reasoning between you and the government, and not about being rational, but about caring about people in the other side of the world, and about people that were oppressed by racist actions. Maybe we can value the emotions in this context as well.
Value, yes. I can see that's a really nice way of seeing things, because some emotions that come up in me are wonderful because they come partly because they just come from really who I really am. And if I see a little child being harassed and molested, or falling into a swimming pool and they can't swim, if I see something awful happening, something very deep comes up within me. I've got to help that child, and that emotion has great value, doesn't it? I get it.
I think so.
Yes.
I also remember you were writing an article on love and affection, I guess. Are you still working on that one?
Oh, I think a little about it, yeah. The question I was raising, just for myself really, was people say, I love Aisha. And then then their friend says, why do you love Aisha? What's so good about her? And then I'm going to start listing. She has a really nice sense of humor. And I just love it when she throws her arms around me. Okay, I will mention some of her qualities. She's quite intelligent, and we think together. Okay, I will say things like that. And in other words, the assumption is that love is based on certain properties or character traits that the beloved person has. And I think this is how Plato looks on love. He writes a beautiful dialogue, Symposium. And that's the focus. What really is the nature of love? That's his idea. And I question that because it's as though what I'm loving is those abstract properties and qualities, not the person. So right now, Aisha, she is beautiful and she has a really nice sense of humor, but 40 years from now, her mind is not going to be as good as it was, and she's a little overweight, and she's lost. But nevertheless, I married Aisha, and I will always love her. Many of her qualities will go, but there is something that is love directed towards a particular person. There's a saying in Turkish that here's my wife Aisha, but then here is her younger sister, and she is sweeter than honey. She's got better qualities than Aisha has. Does that mean I say, the hell with Aisha, I'm gonna have an affair with her younger sister? You don't do that. So, on Plato's understanding, the person that you've loved all your life could just be replaced by somebody who has a little bit better sense of humor, a little more sexuality, a little more of all those qualities. And you're just going to say goodbye. No. So this is what I'm thinking about. And you can see it has a bearing on how you live. I've seen older philosophy professors abandoning Aisha and finding a beautiful 19-year-old student and falling in love with her. And they are too Platonistic, aren't they? They don't know what love really is. Yeah. You know that saying? Baldas Baldan.
Yes, I know that.
And unfortunately, that's part of me who shouldn't be part of me. That's not me,
It's also an essentialist claim, like always sweeter than the honey.
Yeah.
Just because having the property of being the Baldas.
Yeah. Forget the properties. Love the person. Yeah.
Another topic that I would like to ask you about is studying.
Yeah.
If you would like to continue about love, you can.
The thing is, forget the properties in the person. Don't love him or her because they are a certain kind of person. Just relate to the person. Care for the person. Remember that little child that fell in the swimming pool? I don't have to know anything about that child. None of their properties. I care for that child. I can care for the bus driver the same way. I can care for anybody the same way. That's what love really is. So, you can see we can dig into love, and it can actually change the way we relate to people. I look on you in a different way before I read Plato and after I read Plato, before I think. And this is what we're doing in philosophy. I don't read Plato just to get a great theory. He helps me think. He gave me a certain theory. It sounds nice. I think I can do better. That's the activity. I read the great philosophers. I'm so lucky to be able to read them. Not because they knew the truth, but because they can help me do better. And right now, I think I did a little better than Plato about that love question. Yeah. But I thank Plato for that. Yeah.
I mean, as much as I experienced about philosophy, which is quite little, but I feel like most of the time their questions and how they articulate those questions are more valuable than the last answers that they have, because they are giving you the way and articulate the ideas that you can continue from, like your case.
Yeah. I can hear my telephone. You see, I'm part of a community. Sorry.
No problem.
Okay.
I also would like to ask, as I said, about studying. How is your studying routine, and how are you reading a philosophical text? What are you putting emphasis on while reading a philosophical text?
Of course, I want to understand if the person has given me a theory, political theory or mathematical theory, or because there's philosophy of politics, there's philosophy of mathematics. They're looking for a correct theory about the nature of something. So I want to first of all understand their theory, get it accurate before I make any judgments. And then I want to stand back and say, first of all, are there criticisms that I can make? I'm using sort of my left brain reasoning. And then I want to use that the way Plato uses his way of doing philosophy. I'm hoping the light will go on and I will suddenly see there were good things and bad things in that book I just read. Okay, I criticized it, but now my criticizing helped me use a different part of my reason, and I can come up with a better theory. Now I see what numbers really are, or what political society really is. Yeah, so ultimately I want a deeper understanding, and I want to use the philosophers that I've read or talked to help me get a better understanding. Yeah, that's what I'm really after. Yeah.
Also,
you see, we're not just part of a human society, are we?
Is it an automaton?
Well, one of the things Descartes told us is human beings have both a soul and a body. Every other species only has a body. They don't think, they don't feel.
She's leaving us.
Yeah, and gradually in the 21st century, I think we're appreciating how we are animals. We are animals. It's not an insult to say you are an animal. No, it's the truth. Just like that cat we just saw. And we can have those kind of community relations with animals, with plants, with part of nature. And we're beginning to see this, and it may save our planet if we see our intimate relationship with nature. That's where we need some good philosophy these days, I think.
Also, what about producing arguments? I mean, when you start to read people, sometimes you are feeling like they are saying some true things, but you would like to say something else. And in that moment, you have to have a set of skills, let's say, to produce an argument. And
I see what you mean. That's right. That's right.
What can you suggest to young people to do for?
Well, one important thing. I'm reading a book by a nice philosopher, and I'm doing some thinking, trying to understand, trying to be critical, trying to see what is not acceptable, and also what is correct. Okay, I'm doing all of that. And I'm coming up with my own theories. I already had my own theories. And now maybe they're a little different thanks to my reading. Okay. Now, do I care more about defending my own ideas, or do I care more about finding the truth? That is a big question. Am I able to be just as critical of my theory as I am critical of the guy that wrote that book? I'm very critical of him because my views are different and I'm right and he's wrong. That's why I'm criticizing him. My views, my theories are the truth. Of course I think they're the truth, of course, but I ought to be just as critical of mine as I am of that writer's. And that really something very hard for most people to do, including me. It's very hard to say, okay, I can let my ideas go. And I really believe I have a lot of deep commitments among my beliefs, you do too. And yet, somehow, I ought to be able to stand back enough to say, maybe they aren't exactly right. If there's some new arguments and reasonings against them, I care more about believing true things than believing what my ego tells me. And that is not easy, but I think that's where you become a philosopher, caring about the truth.
Primary goal.
Yeah. We want wisdom about reality, don't we? Maybe not. You see? Yeah.
Also, what would you suggest about studying through hard times? I mean, nowadays in Turkey, people are suffering from economic conditions. Our living space is in bad conditions, and yet we are still trying to study and do things, to produce things. And what would you suggest for people who are suffering from bad conditions to continue studying, to stay active?
Sometimes you really can't do it, can you? Sometimes what's happening around me is so terrible that I can't simply sit in an armchair and read a philosophy book, and it's not the right thing to do then. And maybe there are times when philosophy is the wrong thing to do. But we've seen some reasons why it can help us live a better life, reasons why it can help us stand in good relations to other people, why it can help us live not so fearfully. It can do very useful, practical things for us if it's the right time to do it. And if it's not the right time to do it, put the book down, put your arm around your friends who needs help. Yeah, and live. Don't just think. Yeah. The study can be good in its proper place. Yeah, I think so. We see newspaper articles that say, don't study philosophy, don't study art, because those subjects, if you spend 4 years at a university studying those kinds of things, you're not going to get rich. You should study engineering and finance, and you can get a lot of money that way. Now, what's the presupposition of those newspaper articles? The only value of a university is to make money. And when I was a student, nobody would have said that. Yes, you can be better off, usually, financially if you spend 4 years at a university, especially if it's Boğaziçi. Yeah. But that's not the point. It's one point among many other ones. You want to become who you are, don't you? You want to relate to society better, don't you? You would like some happiness in your life, wouldn't you? It's not just money. And personally, I see that as a great distortion in the usual assumptions that people make. Don't study art. Those things don't pay off. A lot of us need more money these days, so we have to think about money. But I'm talking about the values that we see in the people that are unbelievably rich. Unbelievable richness was the whole point of their life. Terrible mistake. Yeah. So that's one thing. We can stand back from our own culture and say we're taking the wrong path. Wouldn't you think?
I agree.
I don't know if that gets to the question that you had in mind, but that's one thing that philosophy can help you with. It's part of a way of life, and at a certain point I say, I don't accept those values. I accept the values that are deeper in me, caring for that child who almost drowned.
I think it is
I didn't
important.
get paid for that. I saved his life and they didn't give me any money. Do I feel bad?
I think it is important to, establish a ground like this, like not having an assumption as do this for money, or having money as the initial form, as a value, and do things to gather that, but having an idea, a deeper idea of what you are doing and choosing it from your what you are valuing for.
Yeah, you were talking about the emotions that really reflect value. Sure, I would say that makes a lot of sense to me. I've never looked at it in exactly that way, but it strikes me as powerful. Yeah.
Your thoughts was what made me think about this. So it started from you for you.
Well, this is what, I do think philosophy is a social enterprise. That's one thing that Socrates believed. He would go to the Athens Maidan and just hang out and talk to people. And pretty soon there was a Platonic dialogue. He couldn't have done that sitting in his armchair at home. Socrates said, I'm going to get inspired by talking to people that seem to know a little something. Yeah. And out of our conversation, each of us can be better than we were when we started the conversation. I'm learning from you, you're learning from me. Yeah. It's not reading a book. It's having conversations. Plato says at one point, he says, the bad thing about reading a book is if you have a thought in response to that book, and you tell him, look, you got it wrong, it doesn't answer. No, that book is silent. He wants conversation. I think that's essential to philosophy. Maybe it's a conversation interior to your own mind. You can have two different viewpoints in your own mind on one question, and then carry on a little dialogue within yourself. Okay. But philosophy is dialogue. Philosophy is conversation, I would say, essentially. Yeah.
Also, in dialogues, like in Platonic dialogues, we are also seeing contradictions and weaker ideas, and sometimes trying and making an error and trying again, and it's like more in touch to life and what we are doing rather than having a solid theory from beginning to the end. And it is also articulating thought, because showing you what you will experience if you talk with people and trying to have an idea, because at the end of the day you will not be able to find the most original or the most closest to the truth idea, and you have to stay humble like Socrates.
Oh yeah, I like that. That's an important aspect too, isn't it? Humility. We were talking about egoism. You know, my views, right or wrong, I'm going to hold on to my views. I don't care about the truth. Well, that tells me I don't have much humility. Humility really is essential, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah. And we were saying that maybe part of what it is to be a person is to be in relation to other persons. Now, one way of being in relation is to carry on a kind of philosophical conversation. And in that way, philosophy is part of human life. It's part of what it is to be a human being, to stand in relation, in conversation. Yeah, that's very nice.
As my last question, actually we also talked about this as well, being isolated while in a department of philosophy and not studying it like ancient times, in touch with different aspects of thought and living. What do you think about relationship, or is there a relationship between philosophy and physical well-being and your physical actions, like your routines or what you choose to do in your daily life physically?
They do say that, don't they? A sound mind and a sound body is the goal for a successful human life. And I guess it is true. I've got to get enough sleep. I gotta eat good food. My material existence has to be in place for my spiritual or intellectual existence to be carried out well. That's a good point. Yeah. And my political life, my relationship to dictators and everything that's going on around me in my social world, that has to allow me to do philosophy too. So it's not easy, but it's part of life, I would say. My body, my relation to other people, my intellect, it's all part of who I am. I'm not just a philosopher, I'm a human being.
Thank you for joining today. And
see, we both got something out of this.
Yes.
So I thank you.
I
thank you. Yes.
It was really a valuable conversation for me.
The right word is devam. We continue.